A tier 3 target must have a designated developer or developers the target maintainers on record to be CC when issues arise regarding the target. The mechanism to track and CC such developers may evolve over time. Targets must use an is naming consistent with any existing targets. For instance, a target for the same CPU or OS as an existing Rust target should use the same name for that CPU or OS. Targets should normally use the same names and naming conventions as used elsewhere in the broader ecosystem beyond Rust, such as in other tooling, unless they have a very good reason to diverge. Changing the name of a target can be highly disruptive, especially once a target reaches a higher tier. So getting the name right is important even for a tier 3 target. Target names should not introduce undue confusion or ambiguity unless absolutely necessary to maintain ecosystem compatibility. For example, if the name of a target makes people extremely likely to form incorrect beliefs about what it targets, the name should be changed or augmented to disambiguate it. If possible, use only letters, numbers, and dashes and underscores for the name. Periods are known to cause issues in cargo. Tier 3 targets may have unusual requirements to build or use, but must not create legal issues or impose onerous legal terms for the Rust project or for Rust developers and users. The target must not introduce licensing compatibilities. Anything added to the Rust repository must be under the standard Rust license, MIT or Apache 2.0. The target must not cause the Rust tool or libraries built for any other host, even when supporting cross compilation to the target, depending on any new dependencies, less permissions than the Rust licensing policies. This applies whenever the dependency is a Rust crate that will require adding new license exception, as specified by the tidy tool in the Rust-Sling Rust repository, or whenever the dependency is a native library or binary. In other words, the introduction of a target must not cause a user installing or running a version of Rust or its Rust tools to be subject to any new license requirements. Compiling, linking, and emitting functional binaries, libraries, or other code for the target, whether hosted on the target itself or cross-compiling from another target, must not depend on proprietary or non-free and open source software libraries. Host tools built for the target itself may depend on the ordinary runtime libraries supplied by the platform and commonly used by other applications built for the target, but those libraries must not be required for code generation on the target. Cross compilation to the target must not require such libraries at all. For existence, Rust compiler built for the target may depend on a common proprietary C runtime library or console output library, but must not depend on a proprietary code generation library or code optimization library. Rust license permit such combinations, but the Rust project has no interest in maintaining such combinations with the scope of Rust itself, even at tier 3. Onerous here is an intentionally subjective term. At minimum, onerous legal licensing terms include but are not limited to non-disclosure requirements like non-compete requirements, contributor license agreements, or equivalent non-commercial research only etc. requirements conditional on the employer or employment of any particular Rust developers, revocable terms, any requirements that create reliability for the Rust project or its developers or users, or any requirement to answer necessarily affect the livelihood or prospects of the Rust project or its developers or users. Neither this policy nor any decision made regarding target shall create any binding agreement established by any party. No idea what that means. And if any member of an existing approving Rust team serves as one of the maintainers of a target or has any legal employment requirement, explicit or implicit, that might affect the decision regarding a target, they must recuse themselves from any approving decision regarding the target's tier status, though they may otherwise participate in discussions. This requirement does not prevent part or all of this policy from being cited in an explicit contract or work agreement. For example, to implement or maintain support for a target, this requirement exists to ensure that a developer or team responsible for reviewing and approving a target does not face any legal threats or obligations that would prevent them from freely exercising their judgment in such approval, even if such judgment influences subjective matters or goes beyond the letter of these requirements. Tier 3 targets may attempt to maintain as much as a standard library as possible and appropriate core for most targets, and look for targets that can support dynamic memory application, STD for targets with an operating system or equivalent layer of some provider functionality, but may leave some code implemented either unavailable or stubbed out as appropriate, whether because the target makes it impossible to implement or challenging to implement. The authors of a pull request are not obligated to avoid calling any portion of the standard library on the basis of a tier 3 target not implementing those portions. The target must provide documentation for the robust community explaining how to build for the target using cross compilation if possible. If targets support running binaries or running tests, even if they do not pass, the documentation must explain how to run such binaries or tests for the target using emulation if possible or dedicated hardware if necessary. Tier 3 targets must not impose burning on the authors of pull requests or other developers in the community maintain that target. In particular, do not post comments, automated or manual, on a PR that derails or suggests a block on the pull request based on a tier 3 target. Do not send automated messages or notifications via any medium, including via an ad to a pull request author or others involved with a pull request regarding tier 3 target unless they have opted into such messages. And backlinks such as those generated by the issue such pull request tracker when linking to a issue of pull request are not considered a violation of this policy within reason. However, such messages, even on a separate repository, must not generate notification to anyone involved with a pull request who has not requested such notification. Patches adding or updating tier 3 targets must not break any existing tier 2 or tier 1 targets must not knowingly break another tier 3 target off from the team or the maintainer for their tier 3 target. In particular, it's Micromo working on closely related targets such as architecture with different features, avoid introducing hitting unconditional uses of features that another variation of the target may not have. Use conditional compilation of runtime detection as appropriate to let each target run supported by target. Tier 3 targets must be able to produce assembly using at least one of Rust's supported backends when it comes to target. Having the support on the fourth backend is not sufficient. It must be upstreamed. The tier 3 target stops meeting these requirements when the maintainers no longer have interest or time, or a target has activity has not been built for some time, or moving a target would improve the quality of the request code phase. We may cause a pull request remove it. Any such pull request will be CC'd to the target maintainers and potentially other people who have worked on the target to check potential interest in improving the situation.
At this tier, the Rust project guarantees that a target builds and will reject patches that fail to build on a target. Thus, we place requirements that ensure that the target would not block forward progress of the Rust project. A proposed new Tier 2 target must be reviewed and approved by the compiler team based on these requirements. Such review and approval may occur via a major change proposal. In addition, the infrastructure team must approve the integration of the target into continuous integration and the Tier 2 CI related environments. Requirements. This review and approval may take place in a PR adding the target to a CI or simply by an infrastructure team member reporting the outcome of a team discussion. I'm gonna lie, Gary. A tier 2 target must have value to people other than its maintainers. It may still be a niche target, but not be exclusively useful for an inherently closed group. A tier 2 target must have a designated team of developers, the quote unquote target maintainers, available to consult on target specific build breaking issues, or if necessary, to develop target specific language or library implementation details. These teams must have at least 2 developers. A target maintainer should not only fix target specific issues, but should use any such issue as an opportunity to educate the Rust community about the portability to your target and enhance documentation of the target. The target must not place a unique fuck. The target must not place undue burden on the Rust developers not specifically concerned with the target. Rust developers are expected to not gratuitously break the tier 2 target, but not expected to become experts in every tier 2 target, and are not expected to target specific implementation for every tier 2 target. The target must provide documentation for the Rust community explaining how to build the target for using cross compilation and explaining how to run tests for the target. If at all possible, this documentation should show how to run Rust programs and tests for the target using emulation to allow anyone to do so. If the target cannot be feasibly emulated, the documentation should explain how to obtain and work with physical hardware, cloud systems, or equivalent. The target must document the baseline expectations for the features or versions of CPUs, operating system libraries, runtime environments, and similar. If introducing a new Tier 2 target or higher target as identical to an existing Rust target, except for the baseline expectation of features of for versions of CPUs, operating system libraries, runtime environments, and similar, and a proposed target must document to the satisfaction of approving teams why the specific difference in baseline expectations provides sufficient value to justify a separate target. Note that in some cases, based on the use of existing targets within the Rust community, Rust developers or the target maintainer may wish to modify the baseline expectations of a target or split an existing target into multiple targets with different baseline expectations. A proposal to do so will be treated similarly to the analogous promotion, demotion, or removal of a target according to this policy with the same team approvals required. For instance, if an OS version has become obsolete and unsupported, a target for that operating system may raise its baseline expectation for operating system version, treated as though removing a target corresponding to an older version, or a target for that OS may split out support for older OS versions into a lower tier target, just treating as the demoting a target corresponding to the older version and requiring justification for a new target at a lower tier for the older versions. Tier 2 targets must not leave out any significant push the core or the standard library unimplemented or stubbed out unless they cannot possibly be supported on the target. The right approach to handling a missing feature from the target may depend on whether the target seems likely to develop the feature in the future. In some cases, a target may be co-developed along with Rust support, and a Rust may gain new features on that target as the target gains the capabilities to support those features. As an exception, a target identical to a tier 1 target, except for lower baseline expectations for OS CPU or similar, may propose to qualify as tier 2, but not higher without support for STD, if the target will be primarily using no STD applications. And to reduce the support burdens for the standard library. In this case, evaluation of the proposed target's value will be taken this limitation into account. The code generation backend for the target must not have deficiency to evaluate Rust safety properties as evaluated by the Rust compiler team. This requirement does not apply to arbitrary security enhancement or mitigation provided by code generation backends. Only to those properties need to ensure safe Rust code cannot cause undefined behavior or under soundness. If this requirement does not hold, the target must clearly and prominently discuss any such limitations as part of a target's entry in the target tier list, and ideally also via a failing test in a test suite. The Rust compiler team must be satisfied with the balance between these limitations and the difficulty of implementing the necessary features. For example, if Rust relies on a specific code generation feature to ensure that safe code cannot overflow the stack, the code generation for the target should support that feature. If the Rust compiler introduces new safety properties, such as new capabilities of compiler backend, the Rust compiler team would determine if they can consider those new safety properties the best efforts improvement for specific targets or as a required property for all Rust targets. In the latter case, the compiler team may require that maintainers of the existing target to either implement and confirm the support for the property or update the target tier list for the documentation of the missing property. If the target supports C code and the target has an interoperable calling convention for C code, the Rust target must support that C calling convention for the platform via extern C. The C calling convention does not need to be the default Rust calling convention for the target, however. The target must build reliably in CI for all components that Rust CI considers mandatory. The approving team may additionally require that a subset of tests pass in CI, such as a compare functional hello world program, specified test no run, or equivalent smoke tests. In particular, this requirement may apply if the target build host tools or the testing function provides substantial value via early detection of critical problems. Building the target in CI must not take substantially longer than the current slowest target in CI and should not substantially raise the maintenance burden of the CI infrastructure. This requirement is subjected to being valued by the infrastructure team and will take in community importance of the target into account. Tier 2 targets should, if at all possible, support cross compiling. Tier 2 targets should not require using the target as a host for build, even if the target is supposed to those tools. In addition to legal requirements for all targets specified in the Tier 3 requirements, because a Tier 2 target typically involves a Rust project and supplying various compile binaries, incorporating the target and distributing compile binaries, for example, build libraries, host tools, and it must not impose any onerous and late requirements on any members of the Rust project, including for infrastructure team and those operating CI systems. This is a subjective requirement to be a priority by the approving team. An exception to this, if the target's primary purpose is to build components for a free open source software project licensed under copyleft terms, that terms which require licensing other code under compatible FOSS terms, such as kernel modules or plugins, and the may be subject to copyleft terms. As such, terms are satisfied by Rust's existing full corresponding source code. Note that anything added to the Rust repository itself must still use Rust standard license terms. Tier 2 targets must not impose significant burden on the author of pull request or the developers in the community to ensure that a test passed for a target. And ticker, do not post comments, automated or manual, on a pull request that derail or suggest a block on a pull request based on test failing for the target. Do not send automated or messages of notifications via any medium, including via ad to a PRR or others involved in a PR or recording the PR breaking tests on the tier 2 target unless they have opted out into such messages. And two, backlinks such as those generated by the issue PR tracking when linking to an issue or PR are not considered a violation of the policy within reason. However, such messages, even a separate repository, must not generate notifications to anyone involved in a PR who has not requested such a notification. A target maintainer should regularly run the test suite for the target and should fix any test failures in a reasonably timely fashion. All requirements for Tier 3 apply. A Tier 2 target may be demoted or removed if it no longer meets these requirements. Any proposal for the motion removal may be CC to the target maintainer so be community validated to the broader community before dropping from the stable. Release. The amount of time between such communication and actual release may depend on the nature and severity of the failed requirement, timing of its discovery, whether the target has been part of a stable release yet, and whether the demotion or removal can be and plan a scheduled action. In some circumstances, especially if the target maintainers do not respond in a timely fashion, Rust teams may land pull requests to attempt to disable some targets in the night or nightly compile to implement feature not supported by those targets. As an example, this happened when introducing the 128-bit types U128 and I128. Such a pull request will include notification in coordination with the maintainers. Such targets will include ideally happen towards a new development cycle to give maintainers time to update their targets. The maintainers of such targets will then be expected to implement the corresponding target-specific support in order to re-enable the target. If the maintainers of such target cannot provide such support in time for the next stable release, this may result in demoting or removing the target.